Section 3, Parts 12 through 18 of The Painted Veil by Somerset Maugham. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Part 12. She knew him very little then, and now, though they'd been married for nearly 2 years, she knew him but little more. At first she had been touched by his kindness and flattered, though surprised, by his passion. He was extremely considerate. He was very attentive to her comfort. She never expressed the slightest wish without his hastening to gratify it. He was constantly giving her little presents. When she happened to feel ill, no one could have been kinder or more thoughtful. She seemed to do him a favor when she gave him the opportunity of doing something tiresome for her. And he was always exceedingly polite. He rose to his feet when she entered a room. He gave her his hand to help her out of a car. If he chanced to meet her in the street, he took off his hat. He was solicitous to open the door for her when she left a room. He never came into her bedroom or her boudoir without a knock. He treated her not as Kitty had seen most men treat their wives, but as though she were a fellow guest in a country house. It was pleasing and yet a trifle comic. She would have felt more at home with him if he had been more casual. Nor did their conjugal relations draw her closer to him. He was passionate then, fierce, oddly hysterical too, and sentimental. It disconcerted her to realize how emotional he really was. His self-control was due to shyness or to long training, she did not know which. It seemed to her faintly contemptible that when she lay in his arms, his desire appeased, he who was so timid of saying absurd things, who so feared to be ridiculous, should use baby talk. She had offended him bitterly once by laughing and telling him that he was talking the most fearful slush. She had felt his arms grow limp about her. He remained quite silent for a little while, and then without a word released her and went into his own room. She didn't want to hurt his feelings, and a day or two later she said to him, "You silly old thing, I don't mind what nonsense you talk to me." He had laughed in a shamefaced way. She had discovered very soon that he had an unhappy disability to lose himself. He was self-conscious. When there was a party and everyone started singing, Walter could never bring himself to join in. He sat there smiling to show that he was pleased and amused, but his smile was forced. It was more like a sarcastic smirk, and you could not help feeling that he thought all those people enjoying themselves a pack of fools. He could not bring himself to play the round games which Kitty, with her high spirits, found such a lark. On their journey out to China, he had absolutely refused to put on fancy dress when everyone else was wearing it. It disturbed her pleasure that he should so obviously think the whole thing a bore. Kitty was lively. She was willing to chatter all day long, and she laughed easily. His silence disconcerted her. He had a way which exasperated her of returning no answer to some casual remark of hers. It was true that it needed no answer, but an answer all the same would have been pleasant. If it was raining and she said, "It's raining cats and dogs," she would have liked for him to say, "Yes, isn't it?" He remained silent. Sometimes she would have liked to shake him. "I said it was raining cats and dogs," she repeated. "I heard you," he answered with an affectionate smile. It showed that he had not meant to be offensive. He did not speak because there was nothing to say. But if nobody spoke unless he had something to say, Kitty reflected with a smile, the human race would very soon lose the use of speech. Part 13. The fact was, of course, that he had no charm. That is why he was not popular, and she had not been long in Hong Kong before she discovered he was not. She remained very vague about his work. It was enough for her to realize, and she did this quite distinctly, that to be the government bacteriologist was no great fry. He seemed to have no desire to discuss that part of his life with her. Because she was willing to be interested in anything at first, she had asked him about it. He put her off with a jest. "It's very dull and technical," he said on another occasion, "and it's grossly underpaid." He was very reserved. All she knew about his antecedents, his birth, his education, and his life before he met her, she had elicited by direct questioning. It was odd the only thing that seemed to annoy him was a question, and when in her natural curiosity she fired a string of them at him, his answers became at every one more abrupt. She had the wit to see that he did not care to reply because he had anything to hide from her, but merely from a natural secretiveness. It bored him to talk about himself. It made him shy and uncomfortable. He did not know how to be open. He was fond of reading, but he read books which seemed to Katie very dull. If he was not busy with some scientific treatise, he would read books about China or historical works. He never relaxed. She did not think he could. He was fond of games. He played tennis and bridge. She wondered why he had ever fallen in love with her. She could not imagine anyone less suited than herself to this restrained, cold, and self-possessed man. And yet it was quite certain that he loved her madly. He would do anything in the world to please her. He was like wax in her hands. When she thought of one side he showed her, a side which only she had seen, she despised him a little. She wondered whether his sarcastic manner, with its contemptuous tolerance for so many persons and things she admired, was merely a facade to conceal a profound weakness. She supposed he was clever. Everyone seemed to think he was. But except very occasionally, when he was with 2 or 3 people he liked and was in the mood, she had never found him entertaining. He did not precisely bore her. He left her indifferent. Part 14. Though Kitty had met his wife at various tea parties, she had been some weeks in Hong Kong before she saw Charles Townsend. She was introduced to him only when with her husband she went to dine at his house. Kitty was on the defensive. Charles Townsend was Assistant Colonial Secretary, and she had no mind to allow him to use her with the condescension which, notwithstanding her good manners, she discerned in Mrs. Townsend. The room in which they were received was spacious. It was furnished, as was every other drawing room she had been in Hong Kong, in a comfortable and homely style. It was a large party. They were the last to come, and as they entered, Chinese servants in uniform were handing round cocktails and olives. Mrs. Townsend greeted them in her casual fashion, and looking at a list, told Walter whom he was to take in to dinner. Kitty saw a tall and very handsome man bear down on them. "This is my husband. I am to have the privilege of sitting next to you," he said. She immediately felt at ease, and the sense of hostility vanished from her bosom. Though his eyes were smiling, she had seen in them a quick look of surprise. She understood it perfectly, and it made her inclined to laugh. "I shan't be able to eat any dinner," he said. "And if I know Dorothy, the dinner is damn good." "Why not?" "I ought to have been told. Someone really ought to have warned me." "What about?" "No one said a word. How was I to know that I was going to meet a raging beauty?" "Now what am I to say to that?" "Nothing. Leave me to do the talking, and I'll say it over and over again." Kitty, unmoved, wondered what exactly his wife had told him about her. He must have asked. And Townsend, looking down on her with his laughing eyes, suddenly remembered. "What is she like?" he had inquired when his wife told him she had met Dr. Fane's bride. "Oh, quite a nice little thing. Actressy." "Was she on the stage?" "Oh, no, I don't think so." Her father's a doctor or lawyer or something. I suppose we shall have to ask them to dinner. There's no hurry, is there?" When they were sitting side by side at table, he told her that he had known Walter Fane ever since he came to the colony. "We play bridge together. He's far and away the best bridge player at the club." She told Walter on the way home. "That's not saying very much, you know." "How does he play?" "Not badly. He plays a winning hand very well, but when he has bad cards he goes all to pieces." "Does he play as well as you?" "I have no illusions about my play. I should describe myself as a very good player in the second class. Townsend thinks he's in the first. He isn't." "Don't you like him?" "I neither like him nor dislike him. I believe he's not bad at his job, and everyone says he's a good sportsman. He doesn't very much interest me." It was not the first time that Walter's moderation had exasperated her. She asked herself why it was necessary to be so prudent. You either liked people or you didn't. She had liked Charles Townsend very much, and she had not expected to. He was probably the most popular man in the colony. It was supposed that the colonial secretary would retire soon, and everyone hoped that Townsend would succeed him. He played tennis and polo and golf. He kept racing ponies. He was always ready to do anyone a good turn. He never let red tape interfere with him. He put on no airs. Kitty did not know why she had resented hearing him so well spoken of. She could not help thinking he must be very conceited. She had been extremely silly. That was the last thing you could accuse him of. She had enjoyed her evening. They had talked of the theatres in London and of Ascot and Cowes, all the things she knew about, so that really she might have met him at some nice house in Lennox Gardens, and later, when the men came into the drawing-room after dinner, he had strolled over and sat beside her again. Though he had not said anything very amusing, he had made her laugh. It must have been the way he said it. There was a caressing sound in his deep, rich voice, a delightful expression in his kind, shining blue eyes which made you feel very much at home with him. Of course he had charm. That was what made him so pleasant. He was tall, 6 feet 2 at least, she thought, and he had a beautiful figure. He was evidently in very good condition, and he had not a spare ounce of fat on him. He was well dressed, the best dressed man in the room, and he wore his clothes well. She liked a man to be smart. Her eyes wandered to Walter. He really should try to be a little better turned out. She noticed Townsend's cuff-links and waistcoat buttons. She had seen similar ones at Cartier's. Of course the Townsends had private means. His face was deeply sunburned, but the sun had not taken the healthy color from his cheeks. She liked the little trim curly mustache which did not conceal his full red lips. He had black hair, short and brushed very sleek. But of course his eyes, under thick, bushy eyebrows, were his best feature. They were so very blue, and they had a laughing tenderness which persuaded you of the sweetness of his disposition. No man who had those blue eyes could bear to hurt anyone. She could not but know that she had made an impression on him. If he had not said charming things to her, his eyes, warm with admiration, would have betrayed him. His ease was delightful. He had no self-consciousness. Kitty was at home in these circumstances, and she admired the way which, amid the banter which was the staple of their conversation, he insinuated every now and then a pretty, flattering speech. When she shook hands with him on leaving, he gave her hand a pressure that she could not mistake. "I hope we shall see you again soon," he said casually, but his eyes gave his words a meaning which she could not fail to see. "Hong Kong is very small, isn't it?" she said. Part 15. Who would have thought then that within 3 months they would be on such terms? He had told her since that he was crazy about her on that first evening. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He remembered the dress she wore. It was her wedding dress, and he said she looked like a lily of the valley. She knew that he was in love with her before he told her, and a little frightened, she kept him at a distance. He was impetuous, and it was difficult. She was afraid to let him kiss her, for the thought of his arms about her made her heart beat so fast. She had never been in love before. It was wonderful, and now that she knew what love was, she felt a sudden sympathy for the love that Walter bore her. She teased him playfully, and saw that he enjoyed it. She had been perhaps a little afraid of him, but now she had more confidence. She chaffed him, and it amused her to see the slow smile with which at first he received her banter. He was surprised and pleased. One of these days, she thought, he would become quite human. Now that she had learnt something of passion, it diverted her to play lightly, like a harpist running his fingers across the strings of his harp, on his affections. She laughed when she saw how she bewildered and confused him. And when Charlie became her lover, the situation between herself and Walter seemed exquisitely absurd. She could hardly look at him so grave and self-controlled without laughing. She was too happy to feel unkindly towards him. Except for him, after all, she would never have known Charlie. She had hesitated some time before the final step, not because she did not want to yield to Charlie's passion, her own was equal to his, but because her upbringing and all the conventions of her life intimidated her. She was amazed afterwards, and the final act was due to accident. Neither of them had seen the opportunity till it was face to face with them, to discover that she felt in no way different from what she had before. She had expected that it would cause some, she hardly knew what, fantastic change in her, that she would feel like somebody else, and when she had the chance to look at herself in the glass, she was bewildered to see the same woman she had seen the day before. "Are you angry with me?" he asked her. "I adore you," she whispered. "Don't you think you were very silly to waste so much time?" "A perfect fool." Part 16. Her happiness, sometimes almost more than she could bear, renewed her beauty. Just before she married, beginning to lose her first freshness, she had looked tired and drawn. The uncharitable said she was going off. But there is all the difference between a girl of 25 and a married woman of that age. She was like a rosebud that is beginning to turn yellow at the edges of the petals, and then suddenly she was a rose in full bloom. Her starry eyes gained a more significant expression. Her skin, that feature which had always been her greatest pride and most anxious care, was dazzling. It could not be compared to the peach or to the flower. It was they that demanded comparison with it. She looked 18 once more. She was at the height of her glowing loveliness. It was impossible not to remark it, and her women friends asked her in little friendly asides if she was going to have a baby. The indifferent, who had said she was just a very pretty woman with a long nose, admitted that they had misjudged her. She was what Charlie had called her the first time he saw her, a raging beauty. They managed their intrigue with skill. He had a broad back, he told her. "I will not have you swank about your figure," she interrupted lightly, and it did not matter about him. But for her sake they mustn't take the smallest risk. They could not meet often alone, not half often enough for him, but he had to think of her first, sometimes in the curio shop, now and then after luncheon in her house when no one was about. But she saw him a good deal here and there. It amused her then to see the formal way he spoke to her, jovial, for he was always that, with the same manner he used with everyone. Who could imagine when they heard him chaff her with that charming humor of his, that so lately he had held her in his passionate arms? She worshipped him. He was splendid in his smart top boots and his white breeches when he played polo. In tennis clothes he looked a mere boy. Of course he was proud of his figure. It was the best figure she had ever seen. He took pains to keep it. He never ate bread or potatoes or butter, and he took a great deal of exercise. She liked the care he took of his hands. He was manicured once a week. He was a wonderful athlete, and the year before he had won the local tennis championship. Certainly he was the best dancer she had ever danced with. It was a dream to dance with him. No one would think he was 40. She told him she did not believe it. "I believe it's all bluff, and you're really 25." He laughed. He was well pleased. "Oh, my dear, I have a boy of 15. I'm a middle-aged gent. In another 2 or 3 years I shall be a fat old party." "You'll be adorable when you're 100." She liked his black, bushy eyebrows. She wondered whether it was they that gave his blue eyes their disturbing expression. He was full of accomplishments. He could play the piano quite well, ragtime, of course, and he could sing a comic song with a rich voice and good humor. She did not believe there was anything he could not do. He was very clever at his work, too, and she shared his pleasure when he told her that the Governor had particularly congratulated him on the way he had done some difficult job. "Although it's I as says it," he laughed, his eyes charming with the love he bore her. "There's not a fellow in the service who could have done it better." Oh, how she wished that she were his wife rather than Walter's. Part 17. Of course it was not yet certain that Walter knew the truth, and if he didn't, it was better perhaps to leave well enough alone. But if he did, well, in the end it would be the best thing for all of them. At first she had been, if not satisfied, at least resigned to see Charlie only by stealth. But time had increased her passion, and for some while now she had been increasingly impatient of the obstacles which prevented them from being always together. He had told her so often that he cursed his position which forced him to be so discreet, the ties which bound him, and the ties which bound her. How marvelous it would have been, he said, if they were both free. She saw his point of view. No one wanted a scandal, and of course it required a good deal of thinking over before you changed the course of your life. But if freedom were thrust upon them, then how simple everything would be. It was not as though anyone would suffer very much. She knew exactly what his relations were with his wife. She was a cold woman, and there had been no love between them for years. It was habit that held them together, convenience, and, of course, the children. It was easier for Charlie than for her. Walter loved her. But after all he was absorbed in his work, and a man always had his club. He might be upset at first, but he would get over it. There was no reason why he should not marry someone else. Charlie had told her that he could not make out how she came to throw herself away on Walter Fane. She wondered, half smiling, why a little while before she had been terrified at the thought that Walter had caught them. Of course it was startling to see the handle of the door slowly turn, but after all they knew the worst that Walter could do, and they were ready for it. Charlie could feel as great a relief as she that what they both desired more than anything in the world should be thus forced upon them. Walter was a gentleman. She would do him the justice to acknowledge that, and he loved her. He would do the right thing and allow her to divorce him. They had made a mistake, and the lucky thing was that they had found it out before it was too late. She made up her mind exactly what she was going to say to him and how she would treat him. She would be kind, smiling, and firm. There was no need for them to quarrel. Later on she would always be glad to see him. She hoped honestly that the 2 years they had spent together would remain with him as a priceless memory. I don't suppose Dorothy Townsend would mind divorcing Charlie a bit, she thought. Now the youngest boy is going back to England, it would be much nicer for her to be in England too. There's absolutely nothing for her to do in Hong Kong. She'll be able to spend all the holidays with her boys, and then she's got her father and mother in England. It was all very simple, and everything could be managed without scandal or ill feeling. And then she and Charlie could marry. Kitty drew a long sigh. They would be very happy. It was worth going through a certain amount of bother to achieve that. Confusedly, one picture jostling another, she thought of the life they would lead together, of the fun they would have and the little journeys they would take together, the house they would live in, the positions he would rise to, and the help she would be to him. He would be very proud of her, and she adored him. But through all these daydreams ran a current of apprehension. It was funny. It was as though the wood and the strings of the orchestra played Arcadian melodies, and in the bass the drums, softly but foreboding, beat a grim tattoo. Sooner or later Walter must come home, and her heart beat fast at the thought of meeting him. It was strange that he had gone away that afternoon without saying a word to her. Of course she was not frightened of him. After all, what could he do? She repeated to herself. But she could not quite allay her uneasiness. Once more she repeated what she would say to him. What was the good of making a scene? She was very sorry. Heaven knew she didn't want to cause him pain. But she couldn't help it if she didn't love him. It was no good pretending, and it was always better to tell the truth. She hoped he wouldn't be unhappy, but they had made a mistake, and the only sensible thing was to acknowledge it. She would always think kindly of him. But even as she said this to herself, a sudden gust of fear made the sweat start out in the palms of her hands, and because she was frightened, she grew angry with him. If he wanted to make a scene, that was his lookout. He must not be surprised if he got more than he bargained for. She would tell him she had never cared 2 pence for him, and that not a day had passed since their marriage without her regretting it. He was dull. Oh, how he bored her! Bored her! Bored her! He thought himself so much better than anyone else. It was laughable. He had no sense of humor. She hated his supercilious air, his coldness, and his self-control. It was easy to be self-controlled when you were interested in nothing and nobody but yourself. He was repulsive to her. She hated to let him kiss her. What had he been so conceited about? He danced rottenly. He was a wet blanket at a party. He couldn't play or sing. He couldn't play polo, and his tennis was no better than anybody else's. Bridge? Who cared about bridge? Kitty worked herself up into a towering passion. Let him dare to reproach her. All that had happened was his own fault. She was thankful that he knew the truth at last. She hated him and wished never to see him again. Yes, she was thankful that it was all over. Why couldn't he leave her alone? He had pressured her into marrying him, and now she was fed up. Fed up, she repeated aloud, trembling with anger. Fed up, fed up. She heard the car draw up to the gate of their garden. He was coming up the stairs. Part 18. He came into the room. Her heart was beating wildly, and her hands were shaking. It was lucky that she lay on the sofa. She was holding an open book as though she had been reading. He stood for an instant on the threshold, and their eyes met. Her heart sank. She felt on a sudden a cold chill pass through her limbs, and she shivered. She had that feeling which you describe by saying that someone was walking over your grave. His face was deathly pale. She had seen it like that once before, when they sat together in the park and he asked her to marry him. His dark eyes, immobile and inscrutable, seemed preternaturally large. He knew everything. "You're back early," she remarked. Her lips trembled so that she could hardly frame the words. She was terrified. She was afraid she would faint. "I think it's about the usual time." His voice sounded strange to her. It was raised on the last word in order to give his remark a casual air, but it was forced. She wondered if he saw that she was shaking in every limb. It was only by an effort that she did not scream. He dropped his eyes. "I'm just going to dress." He left the room. She was shattered. For 2 or 3 minutes she could not stir, but at last, raising herself from the sofa with difficulty, as though she had an illness and were still weak, she did not know if her legs would support her. She felt her way by means of chairs and tables to the veranda, and then with one hand on the wall went to her room. She put on a tea gown, and when she went back into her boudoir, they only used the drawing-room when there was a party, he was standing at a table looking at the pictures of the sketch. She had to force herself to enter. "Shall we go down? Dinner is ready." "Have I kept you waiting?" It was dreadful that she could not control the trembling of her lips. When was he going to speak? They sat down, and for a moment there was silence between them. Then he made a remark, and because it was so commonplace it had a sinister air. "The Empress didn't come in today," he said. "I wonder if she's been delayed by a storm." "Was she due today?" "Yes." She looked at him now and saw that his eyes were fixed on his plate. He made another observation, equally trivial, about a tennis tournament that was about to be played, and he spoke at length. His voice, as a rule, was agreeable, with a variety of tone, but now he spoke on one note. It was strangely unnatural. It gave Kitty the impression that he was speaking from a long way off, and all the time his eyes were directed to his plate, or the table, or to a picture on the wall. He would not meet hers. She realized that he could not bear to look at her. "Shall we go upstairs?" he said, when dinner was finished. "If you like." She rose, and he held open the door for her. His eyes were cast down as she passed him. When they reached the sitting-room, he took up the illustrated paper once more. "Is this a new sketch? I don't think I've seen it." "I don't know. I haven't noticed." It had been lying about for a fortnight, and she knew that he had looked it through and through. He took it and sat down. She lay again on the sofa and took her book. As a rule, in the evening, when they were alone, they played coon-can or patience. He was leaning back in an armchair in a comfortable attitude, and his attention seemed absorbed by the illustration he was looking at. He did not turn the page. She tried to read, but she could not see the print before her eyes. The words were blurred. Her head began to ache violently. When would he speak? They sat in silence for an hour. She gave up the pretense of reading, and letting her novel fall on her lap, gazed into space. She was afraid to make the smallest gesture or the smallest sound. He sat quite still in that same easy attitude and stared with those wide, immobile eyes of his at the picture. His stillness was strangely menacing. It gave Kitty the feeling of a wild beast prepared to spring. When suddenly he stood up, she started. She clenched her hands, and she felt herself grow pale. "Now, I have some work to do," he said in that quiet, toneless voice, his eyes averted. "If you don't mind, I'll go into my study. I dare say you will have gone to bed by the time I've finished." "I am rather tired tonight." "Well, good night." "Good night." He left the room. End of section 3.